Well, hey everybody, it is Wes Seiler with the Berkin Conservative, and I am so happy to be joining you this Wednesday night. So, hope you are doing well. Hope it's been a good week for you. Wanted to welcome you to our weekly podcast. So, this is our chance for you and I to talk about any subjects that you want. We get emails, comments, feedback every day of the week, and so I get to choose through those, and I love to mix this up. I love to be able to talk about different topics. We can go philosophy, we can talk politics, we can talk theology, we can talk culture, art, media, whatever you want. So this is a chance to be able to do that. And I think I've got a really good one for you tonight, but I want to get into some of the comments and feedback that I've gotten over the past week, especially from the shows that we did on Sunday, our Refounding Father and our Conservatism on Tap show. So here's a couple comments that you have provided, and I'm going to kind of give you my answer on these. A lot of times when I'm doing these shows with other guys, we will have a liberal, we'll have a moderate, we'll have libertarian, we'll have other perspectives on there. You don't always get to hear mine directly back to you because I'm managing those guys and listening to them and responding to their points. But in this one, you get to hear it, and I do my best in every one of our shows to respond from a Burkean perspective, hence the Burkean conservative, and do the best I can. So you can let me know how I do with that. So here is the first comment that came in from the show that we did Sunday. This was from Sean, who said, "It was an awesome show as always. I'd love to hear a discussion about the growing notion by some that the ideological divide is one, too wide to bridge, and two, represents positions which cannot exist side by side inside the same nation." And so he talks about some type of national fragmentation, and are we heading towards that now? And, Sean, I'll just give you my take. I think that we are. I really believe that what you're starting to see is a fragmentation on both sides, really. I think you were starting to see conservatives shift more and more and more to the right and have less and less patience with the left. And I think on the side of liberals, you were seeing more and more of that, and you've been seeing that for years as they shift towards an acceptance of socialism. If you think about when Obama was running for office back in, what was that, 2006, 7, 8, right around that time frame, when he was first coming out and starting to announce that he was going to be running for president, there was all this concern: are you a socialist? And what do you think of that term? And he had to distance himself from the term socialist numerous times and say, no, 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 I'm not that, I'm not that. Well, now we're at a point where democratic socialist is an acceptable term apparently on the left. And I think we're heading towards a term where the full term socialist has been rehabilitated, and you could have essentially a socialist party. And they were close to that with the amount of support that Bernie Sanders had. And then on the right, there's zero patience for that. There is an anger towards socialism and towards how many people are following it. And what's not happening is a fruitful discussion where we discuss this, where we discuss what our governing philosophy is. I feel like that's really the fragmentation that you're talking about, Sean, is we don't explain often, conservatives don't explain often why socialism is so bad. It seems apparent to us, especially people who lived during the Cold War. It seems obvious to us. Why would we do this? It's completely against our founding principles. But a lot of younger people, Gen Zers and those type of folks who are coming up, didn't live during those times. I mean, some of them now didn't live during 9/11, right? And so they don't understand those principles. And it's up to us to explain every single generation the principles of liberty and why we follow them. So we have to do a better job on that. And when it comes to liberals, I think they have to get their house in order as well. They have to figure out what they stand for. Are they really endorsing this socialism? We have Christopher Souza on our show a lot, who will tell you that there are differences within the Democratic Party, within the liberal movement, but we don't always hear about that. And how they reconcile those is very important. You're seeing Biden going through that now. So we have to have a better discussion than what we're having, is my answer to Sean, as to how do we start to repair some of those damages and things like that, and the fragmentation. Another one, a lady was saying that she struggled to watch Refounding Fathers because of Chris. She said she's a single mom, and God bless you for that. And she worked in did not depend upon the government. She sometimes worked 2 to 3 jobs, and she said that I think people who take advantage of welfare are low lives. She talked about Rush Limbaugh because in that show I talked about Rush Limbaugh and how I'd had a chance to hear him live and listen to his most famous speech. And so she said he's a truth teller, and people that hate him are the ones that want handouts and ride on the backs of other people that worked, and that she had zero respect for Chris. So I think it's important first. What I would say, I appreciate watching the show. She had some other comments that were very positive and supportive, and I appreciate that. What I would say is we have to differentiate between a person and their political perspective, and I don't agree with Chris very often on a lot of things, but I can still respect him as a person, as an American. He's a husband. He's a teacher. And he tends to be very respectful back to me on the show. And so there's a level of respect there that I have for him, even if I disagree. So I think that's important first. When it comes to welfare, that's a big topic, and we could do an entire show on that. We're going to talk about the difference in governing philosophies here in just a minute. But when we talk about not depending on the government and kind of the sense of empowerment that comes from, there's a lot of things the government can give you, but it can't give you a sense of direction for your life. It can't give you the motivation to get out of bed in the morning, and it can't give you that determination, that courage to succeed. It can help in some ways. It can, repair roads and provide cops who keep us safe, or a fire department who puts out fires, but it can't give you the attitude to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to raise my kids the best that I can, and I'm not going to let anybody stop me, and I'm going to work as many jobs as it takes. I mean, that is just incredible that you have that, and that's not something the government can give. And anytime there's all this welfare and things like that, it always comes with strings attached. It comes at the expense of other taxpayers, and it can only go so far. And it's important that we protect that sphere. And that's the discussion that I always have with Chris, is we have to stop looking at ourselves as victims, as each other as victims, and start working together to be able to have help. And I know you probably had many people in your life who were helping you raise that kid while you were working and things like that. And that community structure and strength is more important than any welfare program. So that's awesome. But I do hope you continue to come back to the show, because even when we have someone we disagree, it's not hurting us to listen to their perspective. It may make us angry. It may say, listen, I disagree with it. But simply having that conversation is important. You're going to hear more than just Chris's perspective every time on this show. You're going to hear more than just mine. And just listening to it is good, because maybe we can start to understand where they come from and how to be able to improve our own arguments so more people don't fall into something that we disagree with. So I think that's very important. Okay. Now, as we get into our topic for tonight, I want to kind of expand on what I said as two governing philosophies. We just talked about our thoughts on welfare. We just talked about how there's fragmentation in the country. And I want you to see that at the governor level, at the state level, between two men and their administrations, and how differently they approach COVID-19. We're at a point now where COVID-19 has been ongoing for over a year. We're starting to head into March. If you remember this time last year, it was already on the tip of everybody's tongue. We were already talking COVID by March of last year. And so now that we've kind of been living in this dynamic for a year and we're starting to come out of it with the vaccine, I think it's a good time to start to reflect and to look at some of the policy decisions that were made starting with last year all the way up until now, because we can start to see some of the differences in the outcome. And what does that say about the leaders that we follow, the people that we elect, the votes that we make? That's what I want you to observe as we go through this. So very briefly, I'm going to touch on what DeSantis did as the governor of Florida. We're going to look at him first, and then we'll get into New York next. So DeSantis is a big Trump guy, right-wing Republican. He barely won his election. I remember that just by a few percentage points. So it was very divided. But since then, he's really enjoyed a high approval rating in the state of Florida, and I think you'll see why. Going back to the COVID-19 crisis, when it first started last year, January, February timeframe, everybody was wondering how difficult is this going to be? How long is this going to last? DeSantis in March declared a public health emergency, and most of the governors did this because the country was starting to wrestle with how bad this was. So when you think about DeSantis, the first thing you want to recognize is that he didn't dismiss COVID. He didn't say this is not going to be an issue. We shouldn't respond to it. We should just keep everything open. No, he went along with what the rest of the country was doing, with what Trump was doing, and declaring a state emergency for Florida. That included a shutdown by the time that we hit April. And I lived through that because I live in Florida. And I remember him saying, unless you are deemed an essential service, we have to shut down. And so we went through that. And think about the time frame in Florida is April's when a lot of people start heading out on spring break. They start enjoying the warm weather. This was a huge nosedive in terms of the state economy because there was all this expectation that we were going to have a good tourist season. And then, of course, that fell apart whenever a statewide shutdown happened. So we did. I remember people running to go get toilet paper down the street here in Florida. People were struggling to get masks. There was all of this stand up of a response to COVID and really wrestling with it, taking it seriously. But then fast forward to September, not that many months ago, but it feels like an eternity because that's when DeSantis reopened all services. He started to strike down any type of local mandates that kept businesses closed. He argued strongly for schools to reopen, for people to put their kids back in school. And this received an enormous backlash from the left. It made national news, and people were saying he's crazy. How can DeSantis be doing this so early in the COVID era that we were entering? And there was videos of him and people criticizing him because he was arguing back, saying, "Look at all these states that are still locked down. Is it working? They're still seeing their cases rise, and in Florida, we think that there will be a slight rise when we do this, but we think we'll be able to overall handle it, and it's going to help our economy." So really fascinating stuff. Now I want you to contrast that with Cuomo in New York and look at what he did during the same time frame. So you go back to March, where he declared a state of emergency, just like almost every other governor, and a stay-at-home order followed very quickly. And if you remember, New York City, where they had a lot of cases early on, was the center of the pandemic. And so he issued that stay-at-home order for everyone very early because the cases were skyrocketing. But then he extended that as we entered into the second, the third, the fourth month of this crisis. He kept those orders in place all the way through May. And then by the time that he started to get some backlash from that, he said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Instead of reopening like DeSantis did, we're going to have a 4-phase reopening plan, which they are still in the middle of for some businesses. And that's where he kept them, is you have to hit these certain codes and colors before your business can open back up. And so many businesses struggled to do that with cases still happening. They weren't able to open back up. And so there was this very slow process to reopen up, completely different than what happened in Florida. So this is fascinating stuff. Now I want you to see the results of these policy decisions. Is you can look at this online. You can go to CDC. You can go to the state websites, whatever you like. But I've pulled some of the information here for you. And you can see over on Florida's chart that they had 30,000 deaths. You can see there is that spike from when it initially happened. And there was a spike in the fall around the Thanksgiving, December timeframe over Christmas. But then look at New York with all of the measures and their 4-phase plan and keeping things shut down for months and months. You still had a drastic spike early on. And then you've had another one that is even larger than what Florida had. And then over a time and a half more deaths. So you're looking at over 46,000 deaths that have occurred in New York despite these measures occurring. And then the economic impact. New York is still, as a state, is still very close to 10% unemployment rate. The reports are now saying that they're about 8.4, 8.2, but they've been hovering very close to 10%, while Florida's has been going down every single month, and their economy has been coming back. What a difference that makes in terms of what they're doing. And the crazy thing to me is watching the liberal reaction to it. So I thought about posting a video from the Young Turks, which is a liberal network that has this huge following. And they were criticizing DeSantis just a few months ago. And you can go back and see that video saying he's a buffoon. He's an idiot. He doesn't even know how to wear a mask. How can he leave this state? He's going to get so many people killed. It's going to be the worst. What a disaster his COVID response is. And then they had a video this past week where these two folks from TYT were trying to wrestle with the fact that DeSantis is absurdly popular in Florida and his numbers are way better than what people expected, including them, and better than other states, including California and New York. And they were trying to come up with reasons why this is. They were like, well, in Florida it's more warm, or people spend more time outside. They were like struggling. They were like, oh, maybe he's suppressing the numbers, and they had zero evidence at all as to how he might be doing that. And they were struggling with, we thought this was going to be a complete disaster, and yet the true disaster here is in New York and other places, and not nearly as much as what we thought it was going to be. Absolutely fascinating to see them wrestle with that evidence that's to the contrary of what they expected. And then one final layer that's deeper into this is you look at Cuomo and what he's done in New York, and it's not just a failure when it comes to COVID-19. There are ethical failures as well. So the way that they approach nursing homes of preventing testing of new patients into nursing homes is now front and center in COVID response debates. People look to New York as, hey, these people are wrestling with it. Look to Cuomo and his press conferences as this guy's doing it right. Now, very few people believe that because there's all this evidence that nursing home patients showed up with COVID and spread it to the tunes of 9,000, 10,000 people in state nursing homes. So the most vulnerable people there who should have been protected were essentially having patients forced in to them before the nursing homes were ready. And they were saying, we had to do this because New York City was overrun. We had no other choice, but turns out they did have other choices and other ways they could have done that. They could have at least allowed those people to be tested for the nursing home to respond, and they didn't do that. And then even worse, the Attorney General of New York has now discovered that there's been false reporting of nursing home deaths. And we're not talking about maybe 10% or 5% or some kind of, error that could be explained some other way. We're talking about 50% of the deaths weren't reported because they didn't want to admit the fact that they had made a mistake. Where is the transparency? Where is the virtue in that? So it's shocking to me to see a tale of two states planned out. And it just goes to show you that this debate that we're having between right and left matters. And so when we talk about doing work to put it back together, to keep it from getting further fragmented, we need to be in a situation where we can learn from states that are doing this right. And when you see TYT responding and trying to justify away what DeSantis has done, why not say, here's this, set aside your political party for a minute, set aside the fact that you're a liberal and he's a conservative, and say, you know what? He did it right. He did it right, or he at least did it better than what we thought he was going to do and what other governors are doing. So let's look at that and follow that model and apply it throughout the country as best we can. And using states as these laboratories of democracy and experimentation the way they were designed to be, as opposed to, oh, we're really angry that DeSantis didn't do worse. Like, it's unbelievable to me that we're at that point as a country. And the only way we get back to a good place is when we're able to set those ideologies and beliefs aside whenever there's a crisis or there's a big issue, and we're willing to look together at the results, the empirical evidence that's right in front of us to be able to figure out the way forward. We have to. That's what makes a difference in people's lives. And that's what we do on this show, so going back to those initial comments that I was talking about is there's going to be times where Chris makes a really good point. And the fact that he's a liberal should not dissuade me from acknowledging that. And I hope the same applies to me, is if I have a really good point or case or argument here, that he can look at that, or any liberal can look at that and say, you know what? Yep, that gave me something to think about. And that doesn't mean that you're any less of a conservative or a liberal or whatever. It simply means that you're acknowledging that person and the effort that they're applying towards the country, even if more often than not you disagree with it. That's how we overcome that fragmentation. That's how we develop friendships. That's how we piece this country together. And ultimately, that goes back to the founding fathers who are willing to set aside their differences to be able to do something special. So that's what we're trying to do here with our tiny little podcast. I hope you support us, enjoy what we're doing. I brought up a couple photos here for our YouTube. Make sure you subscribe because you'll see all the videos that we do, all the shows that we do. You can go back and watch them. And then our website, don't forget theberkinconservative.com. You can sign up there. If you sign up, we'll get your email address, and then you'll know if we have any big events or things going on. Don't forget as well our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, we're on all those as well. So send us in your comments, your questions, your topics, themes, anything you want us to cover. We'll be happy to do it. And I will see you next week.